I joined a secret society in London to find out what was permanently lost in 1928. What does addiction feel like? You do something and you get biological stimulation from it. Then you keep doing the same thing again and again, but your threshold keeps getting higher. You can no longer really feel the same happiness, pleasure, or comfort, so you choose to increase the dose. For a short time, you get the stimulation again, and then you continue to suffer. You repeat this loop. In the end, you are no longer able to get more positive feedback from it, but you still repeat the behavior. You know you can't get more from it, but you still do it mechanically. Well, that is addiction. In my opinion, addiction is more like a kind of compulsion. I am a postgraduate international student from China, studying politics at UCL. I have a pretty serious smoking addiction. Smoking in London can be awkward in a very specific way. You constantly get stopped by random people on the street asking you for cigarettes. Some of them don't even say thank you. It's more like they assume you owe them one. After it happened enough times, I picked up a habit of my own. I keep an empty cigarette pack in my coat pocket. When someone asks, I show them the empty pack and say, "Sorry, mate, last one." Most people just walk away, annoyed but not interested in pushing it further. There are always exceptions, though. And at the time, my English wasn't great. Turning down a complete stranger still felt confrontational. Every Thursday, I used to drink with my classmates at a Wetherspoons near Euston. That evening, I arrived a bit early. I was standing outside the entrance, smoking and holding a pint of San Miguel, waiting for the others to show up. Predictably, a man who looked like a construction worker approached me and asked me for a cigarette. I couldn't really step away with a beer in my hand, so I gave him one. We ended up making small talk. I hate small talk. It's always the same script. "Where are you from?" "China?" "Oh, cool. Ni hao ma?" "I've got some Chinese friends." Sure, in Zone 1, next to a university, everyone has some Chinese friends. In London, if you're Asian, it's often hard to tell whether the hostility you get is racist or just general directionless hostility. You cannot even tell if it's a sort of hostility at all. His name was Ryan. He actually was a construction worker. Up to that point, everything was completely ordinary, the kind of interaction I would normally forget within an hour. Then he leaned closer and said very seriously that the next time I went to the Tesco by King's Cross to buy a bottle of soda, I would receive a revelation. I remember thinking, what the fuck does that even mean? It sounded like something off a badly written fortune cookie. For a second, I honestly wondered if he was messing with me. But Ryan repeated it. The next time I went to the Tesco by King's Cross to buy a bottle of soda, I would receive a revelation. There was no connection between any part of that sentence. None. I couldn't tell if I had misheard him or if there was something wrong with him. Then my classmates arrived. I told them what happened. They laughed it off and said I was probably imagining things.
I know for a fact that it wasn't my imagination. In October, I was traveling from London to Edinburgh and stopped to buy a bottle of soda. By then, I had completely forgotten the nonsense that guy had said to me. But when I reached out and took the bottle from the shelf, I felt something very specific. First, there was this hollow feeling, empty but sharp. And right after that, there was a sort of instant clarity. The feeling you get when you finally solve a math problem and suddenly think, oh, so this is how it works. Like something clicks into place all at once. People tried to explain to me what it feels like when God is working through you. I never understood it, and I still don't relate to it at all. If I had to describe this feeling, it was closer to a kind of realization, or dun-u, epiphany. I don't mean anything religious by that. It's hard to describe. It doesn't have to involve God, but it definitely wasn't imaginary. And then came the feeling of loss. I realized that what I had just understood was this. Something was permanently lost in 1928. The thought spread like a fungus. The moment I noticed it, I also realized it had already been sitting somewhere in my mind, tucked away in an unimportant corner. But at the same time, I knew it wasn't internal. It hadn't come from me. It had grown there. What was lost in 1928? I couldn't stop thinking about it. The problem was that it wasn't even a significant year. Reflection on World War I was already over. The Great Depression and World War II hadn't started yet. Did literary modernism begin that year? No. Eliot had already written The Wasteland in 1922. So was there some world-changing invention in 1928? A major death? Wait, was the Queen born in 1928? No, it was 1926. I didn't have any new insight. I couldn't even do proper fact-checking anymore. But this so-called revelation was undeniably real. And like I said earlier, I'm prone to addiction. And to me, addiction is a sort of compulsion. I couldn't ignore a question that had no answer. By the end of October, same pub, same Thursday. This time I was holding a Guinness. I had a lot of questions for Ryan, the construction worker who had warned me about the revelation. Ryan led me into a basement. The route there twisted and turned, and I honestly can't remember how we got in. To be fair, every street in Zone 1 feels narrow, and every block looks equally old and worn down. He could have taken me anywhere, and I wouldn't have known. For a moment, it felt like I'd stepped into Fight Club. Ryan brought me inside and locked the door behind us. There was a group of people already there, all talking loudly at the same time. I stood in the corner. No one paid attention to me. The atmosphere was restless. Everyone seemed tense, urgent. Two people would be talking over each other at once, not to convince the other person, but just to speak or vent, emotions wrapped in arguments. There was an Indian lady talking about a connection between an Arctic Circle conspiracy theory and some kind of folk deity. She was speaking with real passion, and everyone was listening closely, including Ryan. No one tried to interrupt her or challenge her. It looked like she was the Stavrogan of the group. I could see her influence in people's eyes. It was a kind of collective fervor, an attachment that had been actively cultivated. I know how addiction works. I recognize that feeling. Well, I was starting to understand what Ryan wanted to show me. This was a secret society. Its purpose was to discuss what was permanently lost in 1928. But that really wasn't what I expected. I would have preferred them to be a group of weirdos in robes, lighting candles, chanting from some dark scripture. And yeah, that Indian lady, I'm sure she told me her name, but I couldn't pronounce it. I think repeatedly asking someone how to pronounce their name is awkward. So even though I didn't remember it, I didn't ask again. She told me I could call her Anita. I know that wasn't a name. Anyway, I'd call her the lady. Ryan told me that everyone here had experienced some sort of revelation. The details were different, but the outcome was the same. For reasons none of us could fully explain, but none of us could shake off either. Everyone had fallen into a state of constant, low-level anxiety. That anxiety was what brought us together to think about the question the revelation had raised. They'd already had several discussions ever since they realized that something significant must have happened in 1928. Obviously, 1928 wasn't a major year. All the ideas I'd come up with, they'd already been through them. None of them led to anything concrete. No one knew whether there was any real connection, so all they could do was try to enumerate as many plausible possibilities as they could. A group of people crammed into a strange basement, obsessing over a question. We didn't know what was lost. A thing, an object, a concept, an abstract form of understanding, an event that altered the course of history. Why not consult professionals? Looking around, all I saw was a mix of people talking in circles, 17 to 70. Were we supposed to enumerate every possible answer? We didn't even have a rough boundary. And more importantly, even if such a thing had existed, how would you recognize something that was already lost? Ryan's explanation was simple. Yes, the revelation was vague. No, we didn't know. Maybe we couldn't know, but we couldn't do nothing either. Only people who had received the revelation could join. The revelation was random, and there was no point explaining it to people who hadn't experienced it. He asked if I had told my friends about this. What did they say? Everyone thought I was either deliberately making things up or having some sort of random episode. No one believed anything significant happened in 1928. So I asked them why I was needed here. Did they want some sort of Eastern mysticism or just more diversity? Ryan didn't answer. He knew I shared the same problem they did, anxiety with no clear cause. And in fact, I wasn't the only Chinese here.
When the meeting ended, I noticed the Chinese guy in the room. I thought about talking to him. He was cold, scrolling on his phone with a cup of bubble tea in his hand, and I didn't bother him. I'm not a talkative person. I don't make local friends. I don't make Chinese friends neither. I was just always feel tired, and honestly, I thought the whole thing was just bullshit. On the third Thursday of November, the meeting happened as scheduled. That day, I wasn't in a good state. My sleep had started to fall apart. Late at night, in complete silence, I could hear the bathroom tap dripping occasionally. If it had been regular or completely chaotic, it wouldn't have mattered. But what I heard was this: 5 drops, evenly spaced, then a pause. Then, after some time, another 5 drops. The length of the pauses felt random, unpredictable. I couldn't anticipate when the next drop would come. Sometimes, when it finally stopped, I would catch myself thinking, just drip again, one more time. Then I could rest for a moment. I wouldn't have noticed something like this before. As my anxiety spread, some part of my perception seemed to be getting amplified. I suspected it had something to do with the revelation. I could feel the connection, but I had no way to prove it. The leader, Anita, took me back to the basement. It was the same one as before. I couldn't locate it on any map, but I was sure of that. We started from a different place, took a completely different route, yet we arrived at the same basement. That was when I began to suspect that this place didn't have any real topological meaning. When she spoke to me one-on-one, the leader didn't really feel like the leader anymore. She wasn't mysterious. She didn't hide anything. She was eager to share her thoughts, almost too eager. At times, her rambling even came off as naive. She told me she was afraid of the very idea of disappearing. Then she told me a story, one her teacher had told her when she was a child. In a dim tower lived an old scholar. He was old, slow in thought and movement. His eyesight was failing, so he needed to light an oil lamp to work at night. But there was no lamp on his desk. No one could have taken it. He lived alone. He searched through boxes and drawers, but couldn't find it. He rarely went outside, so he couldn't have lost it. There was only one possibility left. He had never had a lamp in the first place. But he had a habit of writing late into the night. How could he not have had a lamp? The next day, the scholar tried to sleep. No matter how he lay down, something felt wrong. He should have had a pillow. This was his bedroom, his bed. He had slept here for 20 years. How could there be no pillow? On the third day, he felt suffocated and wanted to open a window for air. But when he walked around the tower, he couldn't find a single window. At that point, forgetting was no longer an explanation. These things had existed. They had to exist. And now they were gone. They were gone, but the traces of their existence still remained in the scholar's perception. They had truly existed. The children found the story confusing. Most of them couldn't even follow its logic. They were too young. But for no clear reason, the story triggered a deep, instinctive fear in the young girl, who would later become the leader, a fear tied to disappearance and erasure. She asked her teacher urgently, what happened to the old scholar in the end? The teacher replied, "What old scholar?" I don't think exposing very young children to absurdist stories is a good idea. The leader was a case in point. Unlike the anxiety the rest of us felt, what the 1928 revelation planted in her was fear, and a compulsive need to preempt that fear by uncovering an answer. I think that's why she became the leader. The way she perceived the revelation, the intensity of her purpose, it was fundamentally different from ours. The question of what was permanently lost in 1928 seemed perfectly tailored to her unease. That gave me an idea. If what was lost in 1928 could be a concept, an emotion, something intangible, then could it be that what was lost was not the thing itself, but our perception or imagination of it? Maybe it still exists, but its connection to our senses, sight, Hearing, smell, touch, taste has been severed. I didn't have an answer, but given how close our information was to zero, this felt like one possible way of approaching the unknown. The leader looked at me with expectation. She didn't fully understand what I was trying to say, partly because my spoken English gets worse when I'm nervous, but she wanted me to give her a clearer answer next time. I would. I left before the meeting ended. The lack of sleep had worn me down. When anxiety wasn't intense enough to trigger panic, a meaningless fog took its place. I thought that was worse. Anxiety at least felt like something. The fog gave me nothing. My sense of time started to deteriorate. Most nights I couldn't sleep at all. Occasionally I would collapse into long stretches of sleep. The longest one lasted 20 hours. I missed a quiz. To fight off that uncontrollable dissociation, I started smoking a lot more. The Chinese guy from the first meeting asked me for a cigarette. He said his name was Jingming, but he preferred people call him Jamie. Jamie, just like Anita. That wasn't his name either. Rationally, I knew I had no right to judge. Most people choose a local name simply because locals can't pronounce their original one. There's nothing wrong with that. But emotionally, I still resisted it. I couldn't explain where that discomfort came from, just like I couldn't explain why people sometimes seemed uncomfortable with me. Jingming was always distant, indifferent to everything happening around us. I'm sure he had things he cared about, people he cared about, but it definitely wasn't the revelation. I couldn't help wondering if he wasn't invested. Why was he here at all? He said, "It's a secret society. That's sick. Not something everyone gets to experience. Totally worth posting on RedNote." Jingming, like me, was a UCL student. I'd never seen him on campus, but I followed him on RedNote. His post about the secret society didn't get much response. Not long after, he deleted it. On the third Thursday of the next month, December, I messaged him. He didn't reply. Something more interesting must have attracted his attention. He wasn't coming back, I know, and I started wondering why I was still coming. The short answer is my anxiety was getting out of control, and anxiety always feeds addiction in the worst way. By December, it was exam season. I knew I needed at least 7 hours of sleep a day, but I was only getting 4. The rest of the time, even when I wasn't actively working on essays, I simply could not fall asleep. I survived on 4 cans of energy drinks and 15 cigarettes a day. Sometimes I would wander into narrow alleys at random and walk through them for a few minutes, hoping I might somehow stumble upon the entrance to that basement again. More often, while smoking, I would think that maybe it didn't exist at all. Maybe it was just my imagination. There was no one in my life who could confirm that the basement or the whole 1928 stuff was real. But did I really need external confirmation for everything? The next time I went back to the basement was 18th December. I had done terribly on an exam that day. My disrupted sleep cycle had already begun to seriously affect my life. That night, I proposed a theory. Whatever was lost in 1928, we shouldn't be looking for a concrete object or historical event. Instead, we should pay attention to things that appear clearly in certain cultural phenomena, but are unreliable or insignificant in others. For example, mono no awahe. Japanese literature places enormous importance on it, and there is no perfect equivalent in any other cultural group. Yet, once people from other cultures understand what it actually points to, they can still get it. What we may have truly lost is a form of perception, the ability to perceive something that should have been perceptible, but no longer is. That perception may still exist in some form, but we've lost the ability to name it or explain it. In fact, I felt that we were getting dangerously close to the truth. Some aspect of our perception had been amplified. We were noticing things that had previously been ignored, intensifying sensations that already existed. Perhaps that amplification itself was the method. Perhaps this was how someone searches for something that had been lost. The only real problem was this: we couldn't truly think about something that couldn't be understood or defined. But even if we were still blind men feeling different parts of an elephant, even if we never managed to identify exactly what had been lost, our actions were not meaningless. Perhaps this was how the world was first understood in the beginning, and what we were doing now was something much smaller, trying to retrieve a lost mode of perception. In that sense, the anxiety brought on by searching for what was lost in 1928 might not be a blessing or a curse. It might just be something that returned along with the revelation, a perception we were always supposed to have, but no longer knew how to interpret. I didn't get any applause. I got more questions. Other people asked them, and the leader added clarifications. Most of the questions I couldn't answer. At some point, I wasn't even listening anymore. What I
did notice was this. They were actually listening to what I was saying, not paying attention to who was saying it. I realized I was starting to contribute to this group, or at least that I was being acknowledged. The first thought that crossed my mind was this: would I ever be able to have conversations like this anywhere else, with anyone else? I had never felt integrated into a group or a community, or rather, I had never truly engaged. People wanted me to show up on campus, but no one wanted me to participate. In the basement, however, we were only there to discuss a vague shared goal. Who I was didn't matter, and I was allowed to influence that goal. I was actually participating without being politely kept at a distance. The leader and the others seriously considered my ideas. I had never truly integrated into a community, nor had I ever wished to. Yet when I finally did become part of one, that feeling of being genuinely considered proved addictive, a peculiar kind of addiction. She told me she was genuinely happy for me, but that she needed to go and check a few things. She said she'd find me before the next meeting. In that sense, whatever 1928 may have lost, it really was a good year. By coincidence, I ran into Jingming again over Christmas in Valencia. We happened to be traveling to the same place. It was in a random cafe in the old town. I recognized him but didn't say anything. I just told myself to double-check whether it was really him. Then we made eye contact. He looked shocked by my dark circles and how visibly thinner I'd become. By contrast, he looked exactly the same as before. Well, not exactly. When he was with his friends, he looked completely different from the detached version of him I knew. The thing was, we had both received the revelation, but Jingming was getting better and I was getting worse. I thought maybe it had nothing to do with the revelation at all. Maybe it was just a difference in personality. If I kept hovering outside some boundary and feeling sorry for myself, then maybe my unhappiness was something I'd chosen. He explained the whole 1928 stuff to his friends, to explain who I was and how he knew me. I made an excuse about friends waiting for me and left. There were no friends waiting for me. I don't make friends. I don't feel a sense of belonging in crowds. I kept my distance. I had no real ties to any of them, apart from whatever that secret society seemed to trigger in me. We were getting dangerously close to an answer until the leader stopped me. She told me we had to stop immediately. She said this to me in private because she wasn't certain yet. If she said the wrong thing in front of everyone, there would be no room to walk it back. The closer we got to whatever counted as the truth, the heavier the anxiety and the dissociation became. The switching between them grew more frequent. We were convinced it had something to do with whatever had been lost in 1928. Meanwhile, the people who chose to ignore the revelation, or who never took it seriously in the first place, showed no psychological symptoms at all. So maybe our direction had been wrong from the start. We had been led, though we had no idea whether whatever delivered the revelation was personified or intentional, to keep digging further into what had been lost. But regardless of its nature, one thing was clear. Talking about it made the dissociation and the anxiety worse. Maybe in 1928, this thing, whether an object, a concept, or a mode of perception, had been deliberately struck from record. Somehow, it had been made permanently forgettable.
and what we were doing now was amplifying something that was never meant to be remembered again. The leader told me she was afraid. She was afraid that we were about to recover an answer that had already been forgotten once, that whatever we had received as a revelation or an induction might itself have been a mistake. But by then we could no longer truly exit. We couldn't meaningfully think about something that couldn't be understood or defined. And yes, maybe we would never be able to fully grasp what this thing was. But from the other direction, we also couldn't stop ourselves from thinking about something we had already become aware of. We were stuck in between. We couldn't truly understand it, and we couldn't treat it as if it didn't exist. In hindsight, we should have ignored it. When the revelation first happened, it should have been dismissed as a fleeting sense of déjà vu, a minor anomaly, something forgotten within 30 seconds. But we noticed it. Worse, we tried to expand it. All we could do was let ourselves be eroded by its influence while enduring the growing urge to investigate it further, alongside the unease that kept spreading in our minds. Long before sleep deprivation reached a physiological limit, we would go mad. I told her it was fine, that we should cool things down, that we should dissolve the group, and maybe in 2 or 3 months things would settle on their own, that we would naturally forget, just like Jingming did. What I didn't tell her was this, that day after day after day after day, I would keep thinking about what had truly been lost in 1928, about that thing we could neither fully understand nor fully forget. I had gained so much from this group. I had found a kind of recognition there. How could I allow them to forget everything? Eventually, they would come back to me, and I would continue to receive their attention and their acknowledgement. Someday, we'll end up looking for what was lost in 1928 again.